Welcome back. Look at Cloud Consultant, and today it's episode 11 of our AZ-900 study cram. It's our first episode of the final module, Management Governance. So, Management and Governance. What we're going to look at first, Cost Management. So, what affects costs in Azure? Well, the resource type. So, for instance, you'll get different sized virtual machines, the same way you would have different sized laptops to buy, right? As we can see if we zoom in here, when you create a virtual machine, you get a variety of sizes, for example. And also for like data storage, you can have access tiers, so like hot or cool, for example, which will change the price because it changes how fast you're able to access the data. Also, consumption, so are you pay as you go or are you a contract? So do you just pay for what you use, which is pay as you go, or do you have a contract to say, actually, I'm gonna dedicate myself to having a set number of resources, so say 100 virtual machines for the next 3 years, because some companies require that, say for the compliance and stuff. Next up, maintaining resources. So when you spin up a VM and you put it in a virtual network, blah blah blah, you have to maintain the other resources when you delete the virtual machine. If you leave them running, it'll affect your costs. Geography. So labour cost could affect it, so data centres in different regions can cost different prices. And then also the distance to move the data. So if you're moving it, say, from one side of the world to the other, it's going to cost more than if you're moving it from, say, London to France. It's going to be much cheaper than, say, Australia to New York. Now also, if you're moving into Azure, it can sometimes be free. So if you're moving data into Azure, sometimes free. But if you move it out of Azure, it will be based on the billing zone that it has to go through or has to go in or out. Next up, subscription type. You might have a free tier subscription. And finally, marketplace. So if you're going to use some pre-made services on the Azure marketplace by third-party vendors, then that will cost you whatever the price is that they give it at. So for instance here, CIS benchmark L1 on Windows, 2 cents an hour, whereas other things you can see are free, price varies, free, blah blah blah. So next up, how do you calculate the cost then? Well, we have a pricing calculator and we have a total cost of ownership calculator. The pricing calculator is for provisioning resources. So you would say, if I wanted 10 servers with a specific spec, how much would it cost? Whereas the total cost of ownership is more about what would it cost compared to on-prem, which is here you see, versus on-prem. So you would then estimate how much it actually costs for utilities like electricity and stuff. Whereas in here, you're just seeing in Azure. Here it's Azure versus on-prem. Next up, we have the Microsoft Cost Management tool. So this is where you can manage the costs of Azure. So the first one was saying what affects it, how you calculate it, but then how do you get it when it's actually happened. So Microsoft Cost Management tool. From here you can get budget alerts. Now you can set these based on either money, so when you reach £10 in the month or something, $10, which is a normal thing budget you would add if you're just a normal person, not a company. They can be using 6 figures a month, but you can still have budgets. It can be either that or it can be consumption or size. Once my data is up at like 10 terabytes, I want an alert. Next up, credit alerts. Generally, they're at like 90% and 100%. Now, you can get credits when you have like a free tier subscription, but here we're more so referring to credits that you get for organizations with enterprise agreements, because when you agree to move to Azure, you can often be given credits from Azure, and that's from EAs. And so based on that as well, you have, for enterprise agreements, departments, and these departments can have spending quotas, so kind of like quota alerts, almost like budget alerts, but for different departments, so say like different subscriptions. Next up we have tags. So finally, tags is a way to track resources. So you could say tag every resource that you create within your company in your development environment. I could do it look Cloud Consultant. And that way I'm able to see what are all the resources tagged look Cloud Consultant, what are they costing. And so in tags you can save the metadata, so it doesn't have to just be like your name. You could save some specific metadata about the resource. Now, when you're managing them, convention and rules can apply via policies. So I could say, I don't want, specific words in these tags. And the way you can add tags and update tags is via PowerShell, the CLI, so command line, ARM templates, which we'll get to in a bit, but it's essentially automating provision infrastructure. So instead of clicking through the portal, you can write out a little bit of code. REST API, which is, talking to Azure programmatically, or the portal. And here's examples of tags that people would use. You can read it if you fancy. And that is cost management. Come back next time for governance and compliance.